There's been this crony capitalism that has developed in this country, and then they extend this like myth of the market and free competition, even when they're just shutting it down and consolidating in every way possible. Our democracy, in theory, would provide a feedback mechanism where if, let's say, we had an economy that was becoming increasingly inhuman and punitive, and 78% of Americans were living paycheck to paycheck, and 57% can't afford an unexpected $500 bill, and your life expectancy were to decline for 3 years because of a surge in drug overdoses, opiates in particular, and suicides, then in theory, your democracy would actually advance figures that might do something about the increasing inhumanity of the economy. And if your feedback mechanism is broken, which it is now, because now we've been overrun by corporate interests and the voice of the people has gotten muffled and silenced, then you wind up with something like a Donald Trump in 2016.
Country to be. The Washington Examiner, in an interview with them, you said, we need to become both capitalist and socialist in different areas.
Yes.
What do you mean? You can't be both.
Well, so I like to quote my friend Eric Weinstein, who said, we never knew that capitalism was going to get eaten by its son, technology. And here in the 21st century, a lot of the economic rules we take for granted have stopped applying. You can build a very successful, profitable company that does not employ many people. And if it does employ people, you don't have to treat them well. You can make them all independent contractors and gig workers. So the things we take for granted have broken down, and we have to start solving this problem by evolving our entire system. I believe that the reason why Donald Trump is our president is that there have been these fundamental economic changes that have displaced many manufacturing workers,
and they were his
retail workers. Yes, and the Democratic Party, for whatever reason, is not trying to address those problems. They're attacking Trump himself or the symptoms, but the disease is this pervasive economic insecurity as we make it harder and harder for Americans to find meaningful opportunities. Well, I've been a CEO and business person. I met payroll many, many times. I believe that small businesses are the backbone of this economy. But we have to face facts, where a generation or two ago, maybe someone would have started a hardware store in their main street, but now with Amazon sucking up $20 billion of commerce every year, 30% of Main Street stores are closing in the next 4 years. 30% of malls are closing in the next 4 years, and being a retail worker is the most common job in the economy. So we have to start facing facts. And the entire socialism-capitalism dichotomy, again, is out of date and is breaking down. We have to try and take the best of both worlds and build an economy that centers around how people are doing. Take the markets and have them allocate resources in ways that would actually help families in Main Street America.
You speak of Main Street theme, but you're also educated at Brown. You went to Columbia Law. You're smart as a lick. But some will just go back and say, you know, the guy's just an elitist.
Well, you know, I just spent time with a trucker in Altoona, Iowa, and I rode around in his truck to see what his day-to-day life was. And I wrote a book, The War on Normal People, that breaks down what's going on in main streets around the country. I spent 6 years working in Birmingham and Detroit and Cleveland. And so showing up in these communities, I just wanted to help. And I've developed a real passion for helping the little guy or gal. I grew up the only Asian kid, like a skinny Asian kid who'd skipped a grade. And so I always felt like I had a thing for the underdog. You know, I'm still a Mets fan to this day, as an example.
Well, that's your problem.
Yeah, I know. It has been a problem. But who's the underdog now in America? It's the Main Street American worker who's getting shoved to the side, and we're just not confronting it honestly. Only 8% of jobs are in STEM fields, and 92% are not. So saying, hey, we're going to somehow turn the 92% into the 8%, like, does not make any sense. And the only reason you're even trying is because you're so brainwashed by the market logic, where you're like, oh, if you don't have economic value, then you have no value. And so because your job doesn't work now, I'm going to have to turn you into a coder or something, which is ridiculous on its face. So we have to start valuing ourselves intrinsically and design an economy that actually works for human beings. To your point, Charlemagne, it's like, if the economy doesn't work for us, what's the point?
Yeah.
So what we have to do, instead of measuring capital efficiency and GDP, we have to start measuring things like childhood success rates, mental health and freedom from substance abuse, environmental quality, proportion of elderly that can retire in quality circumstances. This is a way we actually measure the economy before we invented GDP. We invented GDP almost 100 years ago during the Great Depression. And even the inventor said this is a terrible measurement for national well-being. We should not use it as that. And now we're going to follow it off a cliff. So the big evolution is to say, look, we're going to value ourselves in more human terms. We're going to build an economy that works around us. And then we can start answering the fundamental challenges that got Donald Trump elected. Well, look, it's technology. It's transformed the economy in fundamental ways. And we need to make it so that everyone benefits. And it's not just that this like hyper concentrated set of winners and then this like huge army of relative losers. So there have been studies as to what happens to your mind when you can't pay your bills. And when you can't pay your bills, you're like stressing out. It's like, if I pay this, I can't pay that. And there's like always the time money trade-off. It's like, oh, if I spend extra time commuting, maybe I can save a couple bucks. And so what it does is it actually constrains your bandwidth to a point that your functional IQ goes down by 13 points or one standard deviation. So just if you say to someone, hey, here's a bill you can't pay, and then you give them an IQ test, their score actually goes down by 13 points. A lot. That's like a really huge effect.
Yeah.
And so what we're doing right now, Joe, is we're actually making our population less rational, less reasonable, more impulsive, more subject to bad ideas, nastier, more subject to things like racism and misogyny too, because it turns out what happens with most of us is you need executive functioning to resist like racist and misogynistic impulses. And so if I make you cash strapped and make it so you can't pay your bills, you're actually more likely to be like, yeah, like blame them. So what we're talking about, again, it's not this speculative future. It's that we've been doing this for years, and it's actually pushing our population into a mindset of scarcity, of nastiness. And that's why universal basic income is so crucial, because it gets the boot off of people's throats, and it replaces the mindset of scarcity with a mindset of abundance and rationality and optimism and capacity. Running the government like a business is nonsense. They're two very different things. Mm-hmm. But one thing that the government can learn from business is that businesses don't treat their customers like crap. And our government treats us like crap come tax day. We're giving the government hundreds of billions of dollars, and do we ever get like any kind of like celebration of that fact? I mean, if we were customers, people would be like, oh my gosh, you gave us like hundreds of billions of dollars. So I would make tax day into a national holiday. I would call it revenue day. I would have it so that AI tries to pre-fill out your taxes for you. So if you have very simple taxes that are based upon the same info, it just gets spit out for you. And then you'd get a video showing where your money's going, government employees thanking you. And then you can choose where to send the last 1% of your money, being like, you know what, I really want to fund these programs. And then there'd be someone from that program being like, well, thank you for choosing this program. Then you'd get Oprah and Tom Hanks and The Rock in on this video. And then we'd actually not mind Revenue Day, because we'd be like, oh, and then I'd invite families from every state to the White House and celebrate our society.
That's real,
instead
man.
of treating tax day like this thankless chore that we all dread. And we're like, oh, it's like,
I don't owe you nothing, America. Tell me thank you. My people fought here and built this country for 400 freaking years. Can you tell me thank you on tax day?
Yeah.
All this money you taking from me, FICA?
yes.
I just want a simple thank you. Didn't we just talk about that earlier? Every now and then you just want a simple thank you.
Yes.
Yes.
Nope.
Well, so one, I definitely don't think that billionaires are intrinsically evil. I mean, they're the natural byproducts of this economic system that we've had in place for years and years. There were predictions earlier this decade that we'd be looking at like a 20-hour work week by now because our productivity would be so high. But instead, Americans are working longer work weeks, and there's no reason for it. Many studies have shown that the extra hours are not adding to our productivity in any meaningful way. So we should be looking at shorter work weeks. That's 100% right. And the fact that we're working ourselves literally to unhealth and death in some cases is a sign of how sick our economy has become. But because of my cloud of supporters, I do not have to have that soul-crushing experience of calling some rich person and sucking up to them for money. And as a result, my motivations are very pure. And that's what we have to do for every congressperson. And for the life of me, I do not understand, because if you get them alone and you say, hey, do you like calling people and sucking up for money? They're like, oh, no, I hate it. Where's part of the job? And it's like, then why don't we just get rid of it? And then there's like, oh, it's just the way the system is, or something like that. And it's so dumb. I'll tell you, if I had to spend 30 to 70% of my time doing something I thought was brutalizing and not in the public interest, I'd be trying to get rid of it immediately. I'll say, look, this helps align incentives for for elected leaders to represent the people that put them into office, as opposed to having to curry favor with rich corporate interests or individuals that can then buy access to them on the side. Because we're undergoing a mental health crisis in this country. We're seeing record levels of anxiety, depression, problems, and even suicides. And as a country, like, what good is record high GDP if your people are unwell and even dying? So one of the things I've suggested is that we need to shut the revolving door between government regulators and industry, because right now when they come in, they already have their eyes on like the lobbyist job, and if that's the case, then they'll never make any fundamental changes. The disparities between Cleveland and San Francisco, or St. Louis and LA, are much, much higher than they've been at any other historical period, both by the numbers and like after you actually go to the places, you're like, wow, like this is not flourishing the way that you'd hope this. So my wife is at home with our 2 boys, 6 and 3, one of whom is autistic. And what I say is like, what is her work valued at in GDP? And then people think about it and they're like, I don't know. And I'm like, 0, because GDP like doesn't consider that actual economic contribution. And then I say, we have to do is we have to actually evolve from GDP as a measuring stick. Because it actually doesn't work for us. It's almost 100 years old. We made it up during the Great Depression. Self-driving trucks are going to drive GDP way up, but it's going to be very, very bad for many people and communities. So we have to actually change the measuring sticks to something that would actually make our economy work for us, make it so that the market serves us instead of all us being inputs to the market. Because if we're all inputs to the market, we lose to robots and AI. Yeah. I mean, if you look at the suicide rate, it's particularly pronounced in 50 to 54-year-old white Americans, which are the population. I mean, you resemble that.
That's me.
Yeah, that's you. Which resembles the population that right now is just reaching a point where they're like, hey, my job skills don't have any, like utility in the marketplace. And then they go home and they just like, start looking around and being like, what am I doing? I mean, it's really dark. It's punitive. It's punishing. And we've put our citizens in the situation where we all see ourselves as economic inputs. What the market says we're worth is what we're worth. And if we're worth less, then it's our fault. And so the next move is to say, okay, I guess, this place, there's no place for me here.
But you never escape your student loans, no matter what happens to you.
That was just some lobbying on the part of the financial companies, man. They just lobbied the crap out of it.
That is dirty. That's really dirty. When you think about how many people that run corporations that have racked up, I mean, just think about what happened with the savings and loan crisis.
Completely, man.
And those guys skated. Woo!
Yeah.
The vast majority they're carrying around zero burden from that.
Yes.
The vast majority. No one went to jail except a few people.
Not really anybody.
Well,